He was the kind of man other men admired, calm, focused, and steadily building a life on his own terms. Daniel Cross didn't chase attention. He didn't need to. At 33, he had what most only dreamed of: a rising career in creative leadership, respect from peers, and a vision rooted in purpose. But all it took was one woman to bring it crashing down. Her name was Evelyn. She didn't just walk into his life. She performed her way into it. Elegant, sharp, charming. Every word she spoke seemed dipped in admiration. She listened with chafed eyes, praised his ambition, and spoke just enough mystery to feel magnetic. And Daniel, despite all his discipline and discernment, let her in. Not slowly, completely. She's different, he told himself. She sees me. But what he didn't see was her act. The way she avoided questions of values. The way she laughed off responsibility. The way she only showed up fully when she was getting something. Daniel wasn't blind. He was lonely. And that loneliness blinded him more than love ever could. Looking back, he'd remember the warning signs. Not as red flags, but as fire alarms. But by the time he heard them for what they were, the fire had already started. And it wouldn't stop until everything, his peace, his pride, his purpose, was engulfed in smoke. The first cracks didn't make noise. Evelyn didn't scream. She didn't fight. She didn't sabotage his dreams. At least, not directly. She simply rearranged them. It began with small things, late-night texts when he was writing proposals, subtle jabs at his discipline. You're always working. Can't you live a little? Little, and Daniel gave in, not because he was weak, but because he thought that's what love looked like. Sacrifice, flexibility, understanding. All the things modern men are told make a relationship work. But what he didn't realize was that each yes he gave her was another inch of ground he lost. His schedule slipped. His workouts became sporadic. His ambition dimmed, just slightly. But she noticed. She always noticed. When he canceled a client dinner to take her on a surprise trip, she smiled. But not with gratitude, with confirmation. She knew she could interrupt the mission now. She'd entered the inner circle. The kingdom gates were open, and the guards had been dismissed. By the time Daniel realized what was happening, he wasn't leading anymore. He was reacting. He wasn't building. He was maintaining. His life began to orbit around her moods, her wants, her discontent, and it never looked like chaos. That was the terrifying part. It was polite sabotage, emotional manipulation disguised as being in love. She cried when he brought up boundaries, accused him of changing, called him distant when he tried to reclaim space. And each time, he folded a little more. He told himself it was temporary, that relationships had phases, that once she felt secure, things would stabilize. But they didn't. Because Evelyn wasn't insecure, she was strategic. She never wanted peace. She wanted control. And now she had it. Daniel stopped saying no, not because he didn't want to, but because he feared what would follow. The guilt, the silent treatments, the emotional distance. He began editing himself in his own house. He walked on eggshells. He performed emotional labor for two people. He smiled in public and wilted in private. Then came the loneliness, but it wasn't the kind that comes from being single. It was the loneliest kind, being unseen by the person who sleeps beside you, being slowly erased by someone who claims to love you. And worse, knowing you let it happen. The man who once woke up with purpose now woke up with weight on his chest at night when she was asleep beside him. Daniel stared at the ceiling, listening to the silence he used to treasure. That silence had become hostile now, a reminder of what he gave up, not for love, for illusion. He knew some. Daniel didn't know yet, but something inside him stirred, a whisper, a warning, a memory of the man he used to be. And this time, he was finally ready to listen. The shift wasn't dramatic. There was no explosive fight, no grand betrayal, just silence. A silence so heavy it made every tick of the clock sound like a warning bell. Daniel sat on the balcony one evening, nursing a cup of black coffee, long gone cold. Evelyn was inside, scrolling her phone, laughing at something that didn't involve him. Her laughter didn't sting. It just echoed differently now, like it belonged in someone else's house, someone else's world. He stared at the city skyline, remembering how far he'd come, how disciplined he once was, how hungry, how precise. That man didn't check his phone in the gym. That man didn't skip client meetings to attend spontaneous brunches. That man didn't ask for permission to be himself. Where had he gone? Daniel realized something gut-wrenching. He hadn't lost himself. He had traded himself, inch by inch, smile by smile, excuse by excuse. And for what? For a woman who didn't follow his lead, didn't respect his mission, and, perhaps worst of all, never feared losing him. She was never cruel, but she was careless, and carelessness is its own kind of violence, slow, invisible, and irreversible. That night, Evelyn asked him, half distracted, "Why don't you laugh like you used to?" Daniel didn't answer, because the truth was brutal. She'd killed the part of him that knew how. He started observing her, not as a lover, but as a strategist, watching what she respected, what she ignored, how she responded when boundaries reappeared. And what he found confirmed his fear. She had grown bold, comfortable, entitled. She believed he was locked in, that no matter how far she strayed from his standards, he'd still be there, smiling, soft, surrendered. And maybe she was right. Until now, Daniel stopped reacting. He stopped explaining. He reclaimed his mornings, his space, his time. He said no without a preamble. When she rolled her eyes, he didn't chase approval. He observed. When she tested him, he didn't argue. He distanced, and the change scared her, not because he yelled, not because he fought, but because she felt the warmth leaving the room. She felt the silence harden into boundaries, and for the first time in their relationship, she realized this man could walk away, and he might not look back. One afternoon, she snapped, "You're not the same. You've changed." He looked at her, not with anger, but with clarity. "No," he said. "I just remembered who I was before you convinced me to forget." That was the breaking point, not a scream, not a slam of the door. Just a truth she couldn't unhear, because somewhere deep down, Evelyn knew. She hadn't loved Daniel. She had loved what he gave up to be with her. And now that he was reclaiming it, she was losing control. And it terrified her. But Daniel wasn't afraid anymore, not of being alone. Not of disappointing her, not of the storm that might follow, because he finally saw the cost of staying. And it was far greater than the fear of leaving. That night, Daniel didn't sleep on the couch. He didn't write a dramatic letter. He simply packed a bag, walked out the door, and left behind not just a woman, but the version of himself that allowed her to reign. He didn't leave to hurt her. He left to rebuild himself, and that was the most dangerous thing he could have done. The world didn't cheer when Daniel left. There were no fireworks, no victorious theme music, no arms outstretched to catch him, just the sound of gravel under his boots and the echo of a door closing behind him. For good, he checked into a small, quiet cabin on the edge of town. No city lights. No constant buzzing, just silence. And silence, for a man who has been distracted for years, can feel like withdrawal. For the first few days, he was restless. His fingers reached for his phone without thinking. His thoughts wandered back to her, not with longing, but with habit. He wasn't missing her. He was detoxing from the emotional noise, the chaos he had grown addicted to. He was unlearning the illusion that attention was love and that tolerance was peace. Each morning, he woke at sunrise and ran, hard, far without music. Just the sound of his own breath reminding him, "You are still alive." He rebuilt routines like a soldier: cold showers, clean food, long hours with books that made him uncomfortable. Nietzsche, Marcus Aurelius, Schopenhauer. Not because he wanted to look wise, but because he was finally hungry for clarity again. He journaled. Pages filled with questions he used to run from. Why did I stay so long? What part of me needed her approval? Was I afraid of being unloved? Or was I afraid of being unseen? And then, one morning, he wrote something he hadn't dared admit. She didn't break me. I broke myself by allowing her to stay when she no longer respected who I was becoming. That single sentence changed everything. Daniel stopped blaming her. Not because she was innocent, but because healing was impossible while he still clung to the identity of the victim. Victims wait to be rescued. Kings rebuild. He didn't text her. He didn't watch her stories. He didn't hope she missed him. He hoped she didn't. Because if she could move on quickly, it proved something he needed to know: that her love had always been conditional, on his compliance, his softness, his silence. Weeks passed. The edges of his mind sharpened. He began to remember his former self, not the angry boy or the romantic fool, but the man who moved with vision. A man who didn't need to argue because his boundaries spoke louder than his voice. People noticed. His clients returned. His old friends reached out, saying, "You seem different." But Daniel wasn't different. He was just clear. And in a world addicted to confusion, clarity feels like revolution. He started mentoring younger men, not formally, but through conversations at the gym, over coffee, in quiet, rare moments when someone asked him, "How did you do it?" He'd smile, not as a sage, but as a man who survived himself. "I stopped trying to be understood," he'd say, "and I started trying to be unshakable." By now, Evelyn had texted twice. Once a soft memory, once a quiet apology. He didn't respond, not out of cruelty, but because responding would mean stepping back into a version of himself he had already buried. Daniel no longer chased closure. he had built something better, peace. And with peace came something far more dangerous than vengeance, bitterness, or regret, direction, because now he wasn't just a man recovering from the wrong woman. He was a man becoming the right man for the right mission, and that made him unstoppable. Daniel didn't re-enter society like a prodigal son. He came back like fire, quiet at first, but undeniable once near. Not because he shouted his change, but because the weight of who he had become walked in the room before he said a word. He returned to the same city, but not to the same places, not to old bars, not to gossip circles, not to familiar distractions. His life had changed form. What once drew him now repelled him. He no longer needed ways to feel alive. He no longer mistook chaos for passion or emotional turbulence for stillness is power. Daniel opened a small leadership consultancy, not for corporations, but for men like him. Quiet achievers, men who'd built everything but themselves. He didn't promise transformation. He promised truth. And that alone attracted those tired of lies. His first client was a young founder in his 20s, brilliant but erratic, addicted to drama. Daniel asked him one question. What do you tolerate that keeps you from peace? The boy couldn't answer. Not right away. But 3 weeks later, he walked away from a toxic relationship. 2 months later, his business doubled in revenue. Not magic, just subtraction. Daniel had learned, you don't fix a life by adding more. You fix it by removing what poisons it quietly. He kept to himself most days. Early mornings, iron discipline, reading that made him uncomfortable, writing not for others, but for his future self. The kind of writing that carved out illusions and forced the truth into daylight. But life, as it always does, tested him again. One afternoon, at a conference he'd agreed to speak at, Daniel saw her, Evelyn. The room froze, but only for a second. She approached with that same effortless grace, the one that used to intoxicate him. Daniel, she said softly. Evelyn. There was no anger in his voice, no contempt, just calm recognition. She noticed it, how he didn't lean in, didn't flinch, didn't spark. He was present, but not hers. Not anymore. I've seen your work online. You're doing well. I'm doing what I was born to do, he replied. A silence hung between them. Not hostile, not warm, just clear. You were always meant for something more, she said. But Daniel didn't smile. He didn't thank her. He just tilted his head slightly and replied, I was. I just forgot, for a while, because I was trying to be enough for someone who didn't respect the mission. That hit her harder than any insult. She blinked once, and nodded. There was nothing left to say. As she turned and walked away, Daniel didn't look back. He didn't need to. He was no longer trying to prove anything. Not to her, not to anyone. He had returned, not as the boy who once begged for love, but as the man who now commanded respect. And in that return, in that moment of quiet power, he understood the final lesson. You don't reclaim your life by winning her back. You reclaim it by becoming the man you should have been before you ever met her. Because sometimes the universe doesn't take people away from you as punishment. It removes them because their presence delays your evolution. Daniel's evolution was now complete, and the man who once gave his crown away for love was now building an empire no one could touch. Daniel never sought followers, but men followed, not because he marketed himself well, but because he embodied something they couldn't find anywhere else. Certainty, not confidence, not arrogance, but that rare, deeply earned self-certainty that makes people stop and listen when you speak, even if your voice is soft. He began hosting small gatherings, not workshops, not networking events, just circles of men. No masks, no performance, just truth. There were rules, no complaining, no blaming, no pretending. Every man in the room had lost something. A business, a marriage, a father, a sense of self. But what they gained in that circle was more valuable than what they lost. A mirror. Daniel rarely lectured. He asked questions. What do you fear most if she leaves? When did you stop leading yourself? Would you follow the man you've become? He wasn't building a community. He was building kings. And the secret he revealed to all of them was one most had never considered. You don't become high value by being loved. You become high value when you can walk away from what insults your soul and never look back. Daniel taught them what Machiavelli once taught princes. Power isn't taken. It's given away. Quietly. Daily. By men who forget they were born to lead. One night, after a circle had ended, a man named Raphael stayed behind. He was a father, recently divorced. His wife had left him for a wealthier man. I gave her everything, he muttered. My time, my youth, my support when she started her business. Now she's gone. Daniel looked him in the eye, not with pity, but with clarity. You didn't lose her because you gave too much, he said. You lost her because you stopped requiring her to give anything in return. Silence. You traded your edge for comfort. You became a servant when she needed a sovereign. She didn't leave because of him. She left because you were no longer worth following. The words stung, but they were true. And Raphael wept, not from pain, but from the sudden relief of clarity. That was Daniel's new currency. Not motivation, not sympathy, but clarity. The kind that liberates a man from his illusions and ignites something ancient in him. After years of pain, solitude, and rebuilding, Daniel finally understood a man's real value is not in how much he's loved, but in how well he guards his mission. And his mission had just begun. He bought a small cabin outside the city, not as a retreat, but as a fortress, a place where he could train men who were serious about reclaiming themselves. No social media, no therapists, just firewood, steel mornings, and brutal honesty. They woke up before sunrise. They trained. They journaled. They told the truth they were too afraid to say out loud. It wasn't therapy. It was rebirth. Daniel's name started spreading. Not like a celebrity, but like a signal. If a man heard it, it was because he was ready to become someone else. The man who once chased validation in the eyes of a woman was now the man who lit the torch for others to find their way out of the dark. And the kingdom he built was no longer metaphorical. It was real. Stone by stone, man by man, Daniel had become the king he once gave up becoming. Years passed. The fire in Daniel's eyes didn't fade. It deepened. His hair turned silver at the temples. But it made him look more regal than old. His voice, once tentative and filled with questions, now carried the weight of conviction. Not loud, but unshakable. Men who had once sat broken at his cabin's table now ran companies, led families, and mentored boys without fathers. They didn't worship Daniel. They respected him. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples and deep golds, Daniel sat on the porch of his cabin with a journal on his lap. He didn't write about the past anymore. He wrote about legacy, not the kind measured in money or children or fame, but in impact, in how many men stood taller because of one man's stand. Suddenly, a car approached, a sleek, black vehicle that didn't belong on gravel roads. It stopped. The door opened. It was her, the woman he once believed he couldn't live without. The woman who had dismantled him not with cruelty, but with entitlement. Time had carved her face softly, but the eyes were the same, piercing, searching for something she couldn't name. "I heard about what you're doing here," she said, stepping onto the porch like a ghost unsure of its welcome. "They say you changed." Daniel didn't rise. "I didn't change," he said calmly. "I remembered who I was before I made you my purpose." Silence stretched between them. She looked around. "This place, it feels like peace," he nodded. "Because it was built on pain I didn't run from." She paused, then whispered, almost ashamed, "Did you ever hate me?" Daniel looked at her, not with bitterness, but with detachment. "No," he replied, "but I hated who I became for you." Her lip trembled. For the first time, she looked small. Not because he belittled her, but because he no longer needed her to be big. "I made a mistake," she said. Daniel nodded. "So did I. But mine taught me how to never repeat it." She stayed for a moment longer, then left, this time not slamming doors or casting guilt, just walking away from a kingdom that no longer had space for her. And Daniel, he didn't watch her go. He turned back to his journal and wrote one line: "Let the woman who abandoned your foundation be the reason you build an empire she can never enter." That night, around the fire, Daniel told the men, "Some of you still want closure. But here's the truth. Closure is earned through clarity, not conversation. You don't need her apology. You need your standard back." The group sat silent, the flames reflecting in their eyes, not as comfort, but as challenge. Then one of the younger men asked, "How do we know we've finally healed?" Daniel smiled, not with joy, but with wisdom. "When you can see her name, hear her voice, watch her laugh with someone else, and feel nothing but purpose. That's when you've won." And in that moment, under the stars, surrounded by fire and men who had crawled through their own darkness, Daniel realized he hadn't just survived her, he had outgrown her. And the man he was now, she wouldn't even recognize him, but the world would, because he had become the man no woman could break. Only the right one could rise beside. And from that moment on, Daniel wasn't just building men, he was building legacies. If this message hit something deep inside you, if it made you pause, reflect, or even feel a little uncomfortable, then it did its job. Don't let that fire fade. Like this video to keep the truth alive. Comment below. Tell us your story, your turning point, or the lesson you learned the hard way. Your words might be exactly what another man needs to hear. And subscribe right now, because we're not here to entertain you. We're here to build men who lead, not follow. This isn't just a channel. It's a movement.